I moved into 4B on a Wednesday in November, the kind of day where the sky never really commits to being light. Just gray from start to finish. The building was on Hermosa, a block and a half south of the Brown Line tracks, and every 11 minutes you could hear the train rattle past like someone dragging a chain across a washboard. I'd gotten used to that sound within the first week. It became part of the architecture, like the water stains on the hallway ceiling or the front door that swung shut so slowly you could walk to the mailboxes and back before it latched. The rent was $1,100 a month, which in that neighborhood, for a one-bedroom with actual closet space, was something close to a miracle. My friend Dev, who'd found the listing, said the landlord was an older Polish guy who owned the whole floor-flat and lived somewhere in Niles. He didn't do showings. You either took it or you didn't. I took it. The building had 4 units, 1A and 1B on the ground floor, then mine on the second, and 4B directly above me on the third. There was no 3A or 3B. The third floor was a single unit, bigger than the rest, originally built as the owner's residence back when the building went up in the 1920s. Dev told me it had been empty for years. The landlord, Mr. Wojcik, apparently kept it off the market for reasons no one had ever clearly explained. Tax thing, maybe, Dev had said, shrugging. Or he's just old and lazy. I didn't think much about it. I was 29, working hybrid at a logistics company downtown, 3 days in the office, 2 from home, and I was coming off a relationship that had ended in a way that left me not heartbroken exactly, but hollowed out. Ellen and I had been together for 3 years, and toward the end we'd stopped arguing and started narrating. She'd say, "I guess we're not going to talk about it," and I'd say, "I guess not," and we'd watch something on the couch and go to bed at different times. When she moved out of our Lakeview place, she took half the furniture, and the apartment looked like a mouth with teeth missing. I couldn't stand being there, so I found somewhere new. The first few weeks on Hermosa were fine, better than fine. The apartment had hardwood floors, old but solid, and the kitchen had actual counter space. I set up my desk by the window that faced the alley and worked from there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, watching pigeons argue on the phone lines and listening to the neighbor in 1A play Dominican radio through his open window even when it was 40 degrees out. I bought a rug from a place on Milwaukee Avenue, a deep burgundy thing with a pattern I liked but couldn't identify, something vaguely Persian, probably machine-made in India. I put it under the coffee table in the living room. I bought a bookshelf from IKEA and spent a full Sunday afternoon assembling it and filling it with books I'd been keeping in boxes since college. I hung a print of Edward Hopper's Nighthawks that Ellen had given me the first Christmas we were together. I almost didn't hang it. Then I did. It looked good above the couch. I was building something. That's what it felt like. Not a new life exactly, but the scaffolding for one. And the building was quiet. The couple in 1B, I only ever saw the woman, who was maybe 60 and always carried a tote bag from the Lincoln Park Zoo kept to themselves. The guy in 1A, Luis, would nod at me in the hallway and occasionally leave a bag of garbage outside his door for an hour or two before taking it to the alley bins, but that was the extent of our conflict. And above me, nothing. Just silence and empty rooms. I liked it. I told myself that. I even told Dev over beers at a place on Irving Park. "It's like having an extra layer of insulation," I said. "No footsteps, no music, no one flushing a toilet at 2 a.m. "Lucky," Dev said. "My upstairs neighbor does yoga at midnight. I can hear her breathing." "Sounds intimate," I said. "It's not." We laughed about it. I remember that clearly because of what started happening the following weekend. It was a Tuesday, mid-December. I was working from home, headphones on, reviewing a freight discrepancy report that was making my eyes water. The apartment was warm. I'd figured out that if I cracked the radiator valve a quarter turn past where it wanted to stop, the heat actually worked. And I had a cup of coffee going cold next to my keyboard. It was maybe 2 in the afternoon. I heard it through the headphones. Not the train, I'd stopped hearing the train. Something from above. A slow, grinding drag like heavy wood being pushed across a hard surface. It lasted maybe 4 or 5 seconds, then stopped. I pulled one earbud out and looked at the ceiling. Nothing. I put the earbud back in. A minute later, it happened again. The same sound, same duration, same direction, I thought. From what would be the living room of the unit above, moving roughly east to west, like someone sliding a dresser across a floor. I took both earbuds out and sat there looking up. The ceiling was plaster, old and slightly uneven, with a hairline crack running from the light fixture toward the wall. I stared at it like it might explain something. The sound didn't come back. I assumed it was maintenance. Mr. Wojcik, or someone he'd hired, moving things around up there. Maybe he was finally getting the unit ready to rent. I went back to work. By the time I made dinner, pasta with jarred sauce, nothing ambitious, I'd mostly forgotten about it. The next morning I heard it again. This time I was in the kitchen, and the sound was directly overhead, but slightly to the right, which would place it near the front of the upstairs unit, roughly where its kitchen would be. The same dragging, slow, deliberate, heavy. It stopped, and then there was a single dense thud, like something being set down. I stood at the counter with a piece of toast in my hand and listened. Silence. Then the train went by, and whatever residual attention I had for the sound got swallowed up. I went to work downtown that day and didn't think about it again until Thursday, when I was home again, and it happened for the third time. This time it was different. This time the drag lasted longer, maybe 8 or 10 seconds, and the direction was different. It was moving from roughly where my bookshelf was toward where my desk sat. Not exactly, but close enough that the thought crossed my mind, and I let it cross, and it went. I texted Luis downstairs. We'd exchanged numbers the week I moved in, just in case. "Hey, have you heard anyone working in the unit above me? 3rd floor?" He wrote back 20 minutes later. "No." "Why?" "Hearing some noise up there. Dragging sounds. Probably pipes. Building's old." I accepted that. Pipes made sense. Old pipes in old walls could groan and shift with temperature changes, especially in December when the heating system was doing its thing. I'd lived in Chicago long enough to know that buildings here were half alive. They expanded and contracted. They settled. They spoke in the language of aging infrastructure. I let it go. But I noticed something the next morning that I couldn't let go as easily, and it sat in the back of my mind like a stone in a shoe for the rest of the day. My rug, the burgundy one under the coffee table, had moved. Not dramatically. The coffee table was in the same place, but the rug underneath it had shifted maybe 2 inches toward the window. I could tell because when I'd first laid it down, I'd aligned one edge with the seam between 2 floorboards, and now that edge was past the seam, encroaching on the next board. I stood there looking at it, and I thought, I must have kicked it. Or it shifted when I vacuumed. Or the floorboards were slightly sloped and gravity was doing slow, patient work. I nudged it back into place with my foot. The coffee table scraped slightly on the hardwood as the rug moved beneath it. That sound, that scrape, was close to the sound I'd been hearing from above. Not identical, not exactly, but close enough that I felt something tighten in my stomach. A quick clench that released almost immediately because my rational mind stepped in and said, "Stop it. You're in a new apartment, you're alone, it's winter, and you're making connections that aren't there." I nodded at my own empty living room like I'd just been given good advice. The holidays came. I drove down to Champaign to spend Christmas with my parents. My mom asked about the new place, and I told her it was good, quiet, close to the train. She asked if I was eating enough. I said yes. My dad asked if the bears were mathematically eliminated, and I said they had been since October, and he laughed his short, satisfied laugh that meant he'd already known the answer, but wanted to hear someone else say it. I didn't mention the sounds. There was nothing to mention. When I got back to the apartment on the 27th, I brought my bag inside, set it by the door, and walked into the living room. The rug had moved again. This time, it was more than 2 inches. The coffee table was still roughly centered in the room, but the rug beneath it had shifted, rotated, almost so that one corner was now pointing toward the hallway instead of being flush with the wall. It looked wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, but wrong the way a picture hung at a slight angle looks wrong. Your eye goes to it. I stood there in my coat, keys still in my hand, and I looked at it. Then I looked at the ceiling. I dropped my bag in the bedroom and went upstairs. The stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floors was narrow and smelled like dust and old paint. There was a single window at the landing, frosted glass, letting in the kind of light that doesn't illuminate anything so much as prove that it's daytime. The door to the 3rd floor unit was a heavy, dark wood door with a brass number plate, a 3. and a deadbolt I could see was engaged. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Nothing. I put my ear to the door. This felt ridiculous, and I was aware of how it would look if Luis came up the stairs behind me. But I did it anyway. Silence. Not even the hum of a refrigerator. The unit sounded genuinely empty, not just quiet the way an occupied space is quiet, but empty the way a jar is empty, hollow, without the residual warmth of habitation. I went back downstairs. I told myself I'd email Mr. Wojcik and ask about the third floor. I ate leftover Christmas ham from a Tupperware my mom had sent home with me, watched 2 episodes of something I can't remember, and went to bed. I did not email Mr. Wojcik. I don't know why. I meant to. I even opened my laptop and pulled up the email thread where he'd sent me the lease. But then I started doing something else, and the evening got away from me, and I went to bed without sending it. This happened 3 more times over the next week. I'd think I should email him. I'd even compose a sentence or 2 in my head. Then I'd get distracted, or I'd feel like it wasn't worth bothering a landlord about some carpet movement and pipe noise, and I'd let it slide. January came. The sounds continued. Not every day, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, usually in the afternoon, sometimes in the morning. Always the same character. A slow, heavy drag, lasting anywhere from 3 to 15 seconds, followed by silence or a dull thud. I started tracking it, not formally, just mentally. Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. living room area. Thursday, 9:30 a.m. kitchen area. Saturday, 11 a.m. near the bedroom, near my bedroom I mean. The dragging sound seemed to correspond roughly to the layout of my apartment below. Whatever was being moved up there was being moved in the same part of the floor plan where my furniture sat. I measured my rug's position against the floorboard seam every morning. Some mornings it hadn't moved. Some mornings it had shifted a half inch, an inch. Always in a different direction, as if it were being slowly, randomly rearranged from above by someone who couldn't quite see it, but knew approximately where it was. On January 9th, I came home from work and found my desk chair had rolled about a foot from where I'd left it. I'd pushed it in when I'd finished working that morning. I always push it in. It's the kind of small ritual that makes a studio-turned-office feel like a workspace, rather than a room where you happen to have a computer. The chair was now out and angled slightly, as if someone had pulled it back to sit down. I checked the windows. Locked. Front door. Locked. I walked through the apartment bedroom, bathroom, closet, kitchen. Empty. Obviously empty. I live alone. There was nowhere for someone to hide, even if they'd gotten in. I sat down in the displaced chair and looked at the ceiling. "What are you doing?" I said. Out loud, to no one. The building creaked. The train went by. The radiator hissed. I finally emailed Mr. Wojcik on January 12th. I kept it casual. "Hi, Mr. Wojcik. Hope you're doing well. Quick question, is there any work being done in the unit above mine? 3rd floor. I've been hearing some noises and just wanted to check. Thanks, Marcus," he replied the next day. No, unit is empty. Has been for some time. If you have noise problem, call City 311. Maybe they sent someone for pipes. W. That was it. I read it twice. Has been for some time. Not since the last tenant left or while I get it ready. Just for some time. Like the emptiness was a condition, not a circumstance. I told Dev about the sounds over lunch the following week. We were at a Thai place on Damen, and I was trying to keep it light. Probably just the building settling, I said. Old construction. Thermal expansion. Dev nodded, chewing. Could be animals. Raccoons get in through the roof sometimes. My cousin had squirrels in her attic in Berwyn, and she said it sounded like someone rearranging furniture. In a locked apartment? They get in through vents, gaps in the soffit. Once they're in the wall cavity, they can get anywhere. This made sense. I thanked him. I drove home that evening and stood in my living room and looked at the rug, which had rotated another few degrees since that morning, and I said out loud again, "Raccoons." The word sounded thin in the room. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of noise, the building was quiet, but because I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, doing math. My bed was a queen, pushed against the east wall. The headboard was touching the wall. If the apartment above mine was a mirror of my layout, then directly above my bed would be, what? A wall. Or a bed, if someone lived there and had arranged their furniture the same way. But no one lived there. Has been for some time. I closed my eyes and tried to feel the weight of the space above me. 3 floors of old Chicago brick and plaster and wood, and somewhere in the dark column of air directly above my sleeping body, an empty room. Or a room that was supposed to be empty. I slept eventually. I dreamed about moving boxes, and in the dream the boxes were already in the apartment when I arrived, and they were full of my things, but I couldn't remember packing them. I bought a recording app for my phone, not a fancy one, just a voice memo with a long duration setting. On January 20th, a Tuesday, I set it recording on the kitchen counter before I left for work, propped up against the backsplash where the mic could pick up ambient sound. I went downtown, put in my 8 hours, took the Brown line back, and walked the block and a half from the station to the building. I played back the recording that evening with my headphones in. For the first 2 hours, nothing but the building's background hummed, the refrigerator cycling, a distant siren, the train passing twice. Then, at 10:47 a.m., the dragging. It was clearer than I'd expected. Not muffled the way I heard it with my own ears. The phone's microphone had captured it with a fidelity that made my skin prickle. It was a sustained, grinding scrape, and underneath it I could hear the faintest groan of floorboards. Not my floorboards, the ones above. It lasted 11 seconds. Then silence. Then, at 10:49, another drag, shorter, maybe 5 seconds, in what sounded like a different direction. Then, at 10:52, something I hadn't heard before. A tap. Light, rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers on a table. It went on for about 8 seconds and stopped. I replayed that section 3 times. The tapping was unmistakable. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't pipes or raccoons or thermal expansion. It had a pattern to it, not a musical pattern, but the kind of absent-minded rhythm a person makes when they're sitting somewhere and thinking. The kind of thing you do without realizing you're doing it. I set the phone down on the counter and pressed my palms flat against the surface, and stayed like that for a long time. I became methodical after that. I bought a second phone, a cheap prepaid Android from the Walgreens on Pulaski, and set it up as a dedicated recording device. Every morning before I left for work, I placed it in a different room. I time-stamped every anomalous sound. I started a spreadsheet. January 21st. Dragging living room area, 11:14 a.m., 9 seconds. Dragging, living room area, 11:16 a.m., 6 seconds. January 22nd, no sound. January 23rd, tapping, kitchen area, 2:30 p.m., 12 seconds. Dragging bedroom area, 2:30 p.m., 14 seconds. January 24th, dragging living room area, 10 a.m., 7 seconds. Thud, 10:01 a.m., January 25th, no sound. January 26th, dragging kitchen area, 9:45 a.m., 11 seconds. Tapping kitchen area, 9:48 a.m., 5 seconds. Dragging living room area, 10:20 a.m., 16 seconds. Thud, 10:21 a.m. Tapping living room area, 10:22 a.m., 8 seconds. January 26th was a Monday. I was at home that day. I'd called in sick. Not because I was ill, but because I wanted to hear it in real time while I watched my apartment. I sat on the couch with the coffee table in front of me, the rug beneath it, and I waited. At 9:45, the dragging started overhead. I watched the rug. It didn't move. Not while the sound was happening. Not in any visible way. I stared at it so hard my vision blurred. But after the sequence of sounds ended after the last tap at 10:22, I got up, went to the bathroom, and came back 3 minutes later. The coffee table had shifted. Not the rug this time. The table. It had moved maybe 1.5 inches to the left, and one of the coasters I kept on it, a ceramic one with a map of Lake Michigan, had slid to the table's edge. I hadn't bumped it. I hadn't touched it. I'd walked a wide path around it on my way to the bathroom because I'd been watching it, because I'd been paranoid, because I'd been careful. I picked up the coaster and held it in my hand and felt its weight and thought, something is moving my furniture, and it's doing it when I'm not looking. The thought arrived without drama. It was just there, fully formed, the way a headache is just there when you notice it. And underneath it was another thought, the one I'd been avoiding. It's not just moving things randomly, it's moving things to match what's happening upstairs. I went up to the 3rd floor again that afternoon. I knocked on the door. I knocked harder. I pressed my ear to it and heard nothing. Then I tried the knob. It turned. The deadbolt was engaged. I could see the latch plate seated in the frame. But the knob itself turned freely, as if the lock mechanism inside had been removed or broken. I pushed. The door didn't give. The deadbolt held. I knelt and looked at the gap between the door and the frame. It was wider than it should have been, maybe a quarter inch. Through it I could see a sliver of dark hardwood floor, dusty, and a thin strip of baseboard. No light inside, no sound. I straightened up and put my hand flat on the door. The wood was warm, not hot, not heated, but warm in a way that the hallway wasn't. The hallway was cold. The stairs were always cold. The window on the landing let in drafts. But the door felt like it had been in sunlight, or like something behind it was generating heat. I pulled my hand away and went back downstairs and sat at my desk and did not work for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, I did something I'm not proud of and something I'm not sure I can fully explain. I rearranged my living room. Not dramatically. I moved the coffee table about a foot to the right. I shifted the couch to a different angle. I moved the bookshelf from the north wall to the east wall. Small changes, but deliberate ones. I was testing something. I told myself I was testing something. In reality, I think I was trying to provoke a response. I went to bed. I didn't sleep well. I kept listening for sounds from above, but the building was quiet. The next morning, January 27th, a Tuesday, I was working from home. I heard the dragging start at 9:15 a.m. It was different this time. Longer. More sustained. And it was coming from multiple points, as if several things were being moved at once, or one thing was being moved in a long, continuous arc. It went on for almost 30 seconds, stopped, then started again in what sounded like a different part of the upstairs unit. Then again. It lasted on and off for almost 40 minutes. I sat at my desk and listened and didn't move. When it stopped, the silence that followed was total. Not even the building's usual ambient noise, just a flat, dense quiet, like the air had been pressed. I got up and walked through my apartment. Living room. The coffee table was where I'd left it. The couch was where I'd left it. The bookshelf was where I'd left it. Nothing had moved. I felt, and I know how this sounds, disappointed. I also felt watched, but not from a specific direction. More like the feeling you get when you realize you've been talking to yourself and you're not completely sure you're alone. A generalized exposure. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. The mug I always used, a white one with the logo of a rock climbing gym I'd gone to once with Ellen, was on the counter where I'd left it that morning, next to the coffee maker. But it was turned. The handle had been facing right when I set it down. Now it was facing toward me. I picked it up. I looked at it. I set it down with the handle facing right. I went back to my desk. At 10:30, I got up to refill my water glass. The mug handle was facing me again. I need to be honest about what happened to me psychologically over the next 2 weeks, because it's the part I understand least, and it's the part that matters most. I stopped being afraid. Or rather, the fear changed into something else. I started thinking of the sounds and the movements as communication. Something upstairs was rearranging itself to match my layout. And when I rearranged my layout, it rearranged itself in response. It was call and response. It was a conversation conducted in furniture. This thought should have terrified me. Instead, it fascinated me. I started rearranging things more deliberately. I'd move my desk to the opposite wall and wait. By the next morning, I'd hear the dragging sounds from above, from the area that corresponded to my desk's new position. I'd rotate the rug 90 degrees, and within a day, I'd find it had been nudged back, or rotated further, as if the thing above was interpreting my arrangement and offering its own variation. I bought a small table, just a cheap side table from a thrift store on Montrose, and put it in the corner of the living room where I hadn't had anything before. The next morning, at 11 a.m. sharp, I heard a single heavy thud from above, in that exact corner. Like something had been set down there. I started sleeping less. Not because of anxiety, because I was up late moving things and making notes, listening. The spreadsheet grew. I added columns. Object moved. Direction. Corresponding sound above. Delay time. Apparent response. I stopped calling Dev back. He left me 2 voicemails that I listened to but didn't return. I told myself I was busy. I was busy. I was busy with the apartment. I stopped going into the office. I used vacation days at first. Then I started logging in remotely on my in-office days, something my manager allowed during peak season but would notice eventually. I needed to be in the apartment. I needed to hear the sounds. I needed to see what moved and when and how. One night in early February, I was lying on the couch at 1 a.m. I'd stopped using the bedroom. I'll get to that, and I heard something from upstairs that I hadn't heard before. Footsteps. Not the dragging, not the tapping. Footsteps. Slow, measured, crossing from one side of the unit to the other, directly above my living room. The footsteps of someone walking through a room they knew well, in no hurry, with nowhere to be. They crossed the length of the room and stopped. I lay there on the couch and listened to the silence after the footsteps ended, and I felt something I can only describe as recognition. Like I'd heard those footsteps before, not from above, but from below, from inside my own body, from the way I walked across my own living room late at night when I couldn't sleep and was just moving to move. The footsteps had the same pace as mine, the same weight, the same slight unevenness, the way I favor my left leg since I twisted my ankle playing basketball in college. I sat up on the couch and I said, "Hello?" Nothing. I said it louder. "Hello? Can you hear me?" 2 knocks, from directly above, firm, deliberate. I pressed my hand over my mouth. My eyes were wet, and I didn't know why. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to the feeling you get when you've been looking for something for so long that you've forgotten what you were looking for. And then you find it. And it's not relief, it's a kind of grief for all the time you spent searching. I knocked twice on the ceiling with my knuckles, hard enough to hurt. 2 knocks came back. I knocked 3 times. 3 knocks came back. I knocked once. 1 knock. I pressed both palms flat against the ceiling and felt the plaster, cool and rough. And I stood there for, I don't know how long. And nothing else happened. And eventually I sat back down on the couch and pulled a blanket over myself and stared at the wall and didn't sleep at all. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom because of what happened on February 3rd. I'd been lying in bed, almost asleep, when I heard the dragging sound start above me, not in the living room, not in the kitchen, but directly over the bedroom. Right above the bed. It was louder than usual, more insistent, and it went on for a long time, maybe 20 seconds, and when it stopped, there was a creak, a long, slow creak, like weight settling onto a bed frame, like someone lying down. I lay in my bed and listened to what sounded impossibly like someone in the empty apartment above me getting into bed at the same time I was in mine, in the same position, in the same corresponding spot. And I felt the ceiling lower. It didn't, of course. The ceiling didn't move, but there was a pressure, a psychological pressure, a gravity that made me feel like the space between my body and whatever was above me had compressed. Like the 12 feet of air and plaster and wood between my ceiling and the floor above had become 6 feet, then 4, then 2. I got out of bed and went to the living room and slept on the couch, and I've slept there ever since. February 7th, a Saturday. I hadn't left the apartment in 3 days. I was standing in the kitchen making scrambled eggs. I'd been living on eggs and toast and the occasional delivery order when I noticed something on the counter that shouldn't have been there. A key. It was sitting next to the stove, on the section of counter where I keep the salt and pepper and a small ceramic dish that holds rubber bands and twist ties. A brass key, old-looking, with a simple cut. Not a modern key, the kind that goes in a deadbolt from the 1920s. I picked it up. It was warm, not body warm. Warmer than that, like it had been sitting in sunlight, or near a heat source, or in someone's hand for a long time. I held it and looked at the ceiling. I hadn't heard any sounds that morning. No dragging, no tapping, no footsteps. But the key was there, and it hadn't been there the night before, and I hadn't put it there. I knew what it was for. I didn't go upstairs immediately. I ate my eggs, I washed the plate, I dried it and put it away. I wiped down the counter. I did all of this slowly, deliberately, the way you do things when you're trying to convince yourself you're still in control of your own schedule. Then I picked up the key and went upstairs. The stairwell was cold, as always. The frosted window on the landing was letting in thin February light. The door to the third-floor unit was the same dark wood, the same brass 3, the same deadbolt. I put the key in the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it, and the deadbolt slid back with a heavy, smooth click that I felt in my wrist. I turned the knob. The door opened inward into darkness. I want to describe what I saw accurately because the inaccuracy of memory is, I think, part of what happened to me later. The unit was large, larger than mine. I'd known this with higher ceilings and wider rooms. The front door opened into a hallway that ran straight back toward what I could see was a kitchen. To the left, a wide doorway opened into the living room. The floors were hardwood, the same dark oak as mine, but older, more worn. The walls were the same off-white plaster. The windows, tall, double-hung, facing the street, were uncovered, and the gray light came through them in long, flat planes that illuminated the dust in the air. The apartment was not empty. There was furniture, arranged in a layout that I recognized immediately, because it was mine. Not my actual furniture, not my couch, not my coffee table, not my bookshelf, but the same arrangement. A couch against the same wall, in the same position, facing the same direction. A coffee table in front of it, slightly off-center in exactly the way mine was slightly off-center. A bookshelf against the east wall, where I'd moved mine in January. The furniture was old. The couch was a heavy, dark piece, the kind you'd find in a 1940s parlor. The coffee table was solid wood, scarred and ring-stained. The bookshelf was built in, part of the wall, filled with books whose spines I couldn't read from the doorway. And on the floor, under the coffee table, a rug, burgundy, with a pattern I couldn't identify. I stepped inside. The floor groaned under my weight. The air was warm, much warmer than the hallway, warmer than my apartment. It smelled like dust and something else, something faintly organic, like the inside of an old trunk or the pages of a very old book. Not unpleasant, just old. I walked into the living room and stood in the middle of it and looked around. Everything was a version of what I had downstairs, not identical, older, heavier, more permanent. Like my apartment was a sketch and this was the painting it had been based on. The wall where I'd hung the Hopper print above the couch had something hanging in the same spot, not a print, a mirror. Oval, dark framed, the glass slightly foxed at the edges. I walked closer and looked into it. I saw my face, and for a moment brief, less than a second, I saw another face behind mine. Not clearly, not in detail. Just the suggestion of features, the vaguest shape of eyes and a mouth, like a face forming in smoke or water. It was there, and then it was gone, and there was only my reflection, pale and wide-eyed in the cold gray light. I stepped back. I went to the kitchen. Same layout as mine. A counter, a stove, an old gas range, the kind with iron grate burners, a sink with a single faucet. On the counter, in the spot where I keep my ceramic dish for rubber bands, there was a small ceramic bowl. White, chipped at the rim. Inside the bowl, a single key, brass, identical to the one in my hand. I looked at the key in my hand. I looked at the key in the bowl. They were the same. I put mine down next to the bowl and the two keys lay there side by side, twins. I went to the bedroom. This was the room I hadn't wanted to see, and I knew it as soon as I stood in the doorway, and I went in anyway. A bed against the east wall, a queen like mine. The frame was iron, painted black, old. There were sheets on it, white, slightly yellowed. A single pillow. The bed was made, but there was an impression in it, a long, body-shaped depression, as if someone had been lying there recently. Or as if someone had been lying there for a very long time. I reached out and touched the sheet. It was warm. I pulled my hand back and left the room and walked quickly down the hallway and out the door and closed it behind me. I did not lock it. I went downstairs to my apartment and shut my door and locked it and sat on the couch and put my head in my hands. I should have left that day. I know that. I should have packed a bag and gone to Dev's or a hotel or my parents' place in Champaign and never come back. And if I could explain to you why I didn't, I would. But I can't, because the explanation I'd have to give is one I don't fully believe, and it's this. I didn't leave because leaving felt impossible. Not physically, not practically. I had a car, I had money, I had places to go. But the thought of leaving that apartment, of leaving the building, produced a feeling in me that I can only describe as vertigo, like the floor was tilting, and if I moved toward the door, I'd slide into something worse. I stayed, and over the next 2 weeks, I went upstairs every day. I didn't always go inside. Sometimes I just stood at the door and listened. Sometimes I turned the knob. I never locked the deadbolt again, so the door opened freely and looked in from the hallway and then left. Sometimes I went in and sat on the old couch and just sat. The way you sit in a place that feels like it's yours, even though you know it isn't. The sound stopped. After I'd entered the apartment upstairs, the dragging and tapping from my ceiling ceased entirely. As if the purpose of the sounds had been to get my attention, and now that it had my attention, they were no longer necessary. But my furniture continued to move. Not every day, but often enough. Small shifts. The coffee table an inch to the left. The rug rotated. A book on the shelf moved from one end to the other. My desk chair pulled out, always when I wasn't looking. Always by the time I came back from the bathroom or the kitchen or a trip upstairs. And here's the thing I have to tell you. The thing that I've been building toward. The movements weren't random. They were corrections. My furniture was being moved to more closely match the arrangement upstairs. When I'd placed the coffee table slightly to the right of center, it would drift left toward the position of the table above. When I'd angled the couch differently, it would be nudged back toward the angle of the couch upstairs. The apartment above was the template. Mine was the copy. And whatever was up there was making sure the copy stayed accurate. I tested this. I moved my bookshelf back to the north wall, away from the east wall where the built-in shelves were upstairs. Within 2 days, it had moved 6 inches toward the east wall, not all at once, not while I watched. But it moved. I pushed it back. It moved again. I pushed it back a third time and wedged a doorstop under one of the legs to hold it in place. The next morning, the doorstop was across the room under the coffee table and the bookshelf was 4 inches closer to the east wall. I stopped fighting it. In late February, I went upstairs and found the apartment had changed. Not dramatically. The furniture was the same, but there were new things. A coat draped over the arm of the couch. A pair of shoes by the front door. Brown leather, older style, about my size. A book open on the coffee table, face down, spine cracked, as if someone had set it there to hold their place. I picked up the book. It was a paperback, old, the pages yellowed and soft. The cover was missing. I turned it over and read a few lines from the open page. It was a novel. I didn't recognize it, and the passage I read described a man sitting alone in a room, listening to sounds from below, trying to determine whether the person downstairs was someone he could trust. I set the book down exactly where it had been and left. The next day, the coat was in a different position. The shoes had been moved from the front door to the bedroom. The book was open to a different page. And on the kitchen counter, in the ceramic bowl, next to the 2 keys, there was a note. I don't mean a letter. I don't mean a message in handwriting. It was a scrap of paper, torn from something larger, and on it was a single word written in pencil so faint I had to hold it up to the window to read it. Stay. I put the paper back in the bowl. I went downstairs and sat in my apartment and looked at my living room, at my furniture, slowly migrating toward its upstairs template, and I thought about what staying meant. Not staying in the building. I was already staying in the building. Staying, as in, stop trying to maintain the difference. Stop moving the bookshelf back. Stop noticing when the rug shifts. Stop tracking the changes. Let the copy become the original. Let mine become his. Whose? I didn't know. The apartment upstairs had no name on the door. No mail, no photographs, no identification of any kind. Just furniture and shoes and a coat and a book and a warmth that shouldn't have been there, and an impression in the bed that looked more and more, each time I saw it, like my body. March came. I'd lost 12 pounds. I was eating but not enough and not the right things. I was sleeping on the couch in something that wasn't quite sleep, more like a shallow unconsciousness that I'd fall into and surface from without any sense of time having passed. I was still logging into work, but my output had dropped to nearly nothing. My manager sent me an email asking if everything was okay. I said I'd been dealing with a personal matter and I'd get caught up. I hadn't spoken to Dev in 3 weeks. He'd stopped calling. My mother had called twice and I'd answered both times and told her I was fine, just busy, and she'd accepted this because she wanted to. I was spending more and more time in the apartment upstairs. I'd started bringing things. Not consciously at first. I'd go up with my coffee mug and set it on the counter and leave it there and come back the next day and it would be in the dish rack by the sink, washed. I brought a book, my own book, a crime novel I'd been reading, and left it on the coffee table next to the other book. The next day, it had been moved to the bookshelf, inserted between two of the old volumes, as if it had always been there. I brought a sweater and left it on the couch. The next day, it was folded on the bed in the bedroom, next to the pillow. These offerings, that's the word I used in my head, and the fact that I used it should have alarmed me. These offerings were always accepted, always placed somewhere appropriate, always integrated into the arrangement of the apartment as if they belonged there. I started to wonder if I belonged there. One night in mid-March, I was sitting on the couch upstairs, the old one, not mine, and I looked around the room and I couldn't immediately remember which apartment I was in. Not because they looked identical, the furniture was different, the light was different, the smell was different. But the feeling of the room was the same. The same solitude, the same silence, the same sense of enclosed private space that I'd been craving since Ellen left, since before Ellen left, since I was old enough to know that what I wanted most in the world was a place where no one could reach me. And I thought, is that what this is? A place where no one can reach me? And then I thought, or is it a place where I can't reach anyone? I went downstairs that night and stood in my living room and looked at it as if I were seeing it for the first time. The furniture was almost entirely in the upstairs configuration now. I'd stopped resisting the corrections weeks ago, and the slow migration had accelerated. My coffee table was in the exact position of the one above. My couch, the same angle. My rug, rotated to match the one upstairs. My bookshelf was against the east wall. My apartment looked like a younger, cheaper version of the apartment above. Like a rehearsal for something. I opened my laptop and searched for the building's address, the street number on Hermosa. I found it on the Cook County Assessor's website. The building was built in 1923. The current owner was listed as Tadeusz Wojcik. Previous owner, Eugeniusz Wojcik, deceased 2004. Before that, the records were scanned documents, harder to read. I spent an hour scrolling through digitized pages of property transfers and tax records, and I found, in a 1967 filing, a note attached to the third-floor unit. Unit not available for lease. Occupant, resident owner. Resident owner. Eugeniusz Wojcik. Mr. Wojcik's father, presumably. I searched for Eugeniusz Wojcik. I didn't find much. A brief obituary in a Polish-language newspaper, which I ran through a translator. It said he'd been born in Krakow in 1920, emigrated to the United States in 1948, worked as a carpenter, built the 4-flat on Hermosa himself. He'd lived in the third-floor unit for over 50 years. He died in 2004 at the age of 84. He died in the unit. The obituary didn't say this explicitly, but there was a phrase the translator rendered as passed away at home. And home, for Eugeniusz Wojcik, was the third-floor unit of the building on Hermosa. I looked at the ceiling. I thought about the furniture in the apartment upstairs, the heavy, solid pieces, the kind a carpenter would own, the iron bed frame, the built-in bookshelf, the gas range, things that had been there for decades, things that were part of the building the way the walls were part of the building. And I thought about the impression in the bed, the body-shaped impression that looked, each time I saw it, more like me. I went upstairs the next afternoon with a specific intention. I wanted to look at the bedroom more carefully. I'd been avoiding it since the first visit. I'd go in, glance around, and leave. The warmth of the sheets unnerved me. The impression in the bed unnerved me. But I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And the bedroom felt like the center of it, the place where whatever was in the apartment was most concentrated. The front door was open when I got there. I'd left it closed the day before, not locked but closed. Now it was standing about 6 inches ajar, as if someone had opened it and then walked away and expecting me to follow. I went in. The hallway was warm. The living room was as I'd left it. The kitchen was as I'd left it, my coffee mug still in the dish rack. The bedroom door was also open. I walked down the hall and stood in the doorway. The bed had been turned down. The sheet was folded back on one side, the left side, the side I slept on at home, the side I'd always slept on, and the pillow had been fluffed. The impression was still there, on the right side, deeper than before. The sweater I'd brought up weeks ago was no longer folded on the bed. It was hanging in the closet, which was open. I could see it on a wire hanger, next to a row of other garments, old clothes, men's clothes, things that had been there for years. My sweater looked like it belonged. I walked to the bed and sat on the left side. The mattress was old but not uncomfortable. The sheets were cotton, thin from washing, and they were warm, as everything in this apartment was warm. I sat there and looked at the room, the closet, the window curtained with a heavy fabric that let in almost no light. The nightstand, there was a nightstand on the right side, and on it, a glass of water. A glass of water. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of that. I'd been in this room half a dozen times, and there had never been a glass of water on the nightstand. But there it was. A plain glass, half full, with a slight film on the surface, the way water looks when it's been sitting out for a while. Except it hadn't been there an hour ago. So it had been poured recently, and it had been placed on the right side of the bed, the side with the impression, and the left side had been turned down for me. I understood, with a clarity that felt like a physical sensation, like stepping from shade into sunlight, what was being offered. The apartment was a room for me. The bed was made for me. The water was poured for someone, for whatever occupied the impression on the right side, and the left side was an invitation. Not to sleep, or not just to sleep. To stay. To occupy the space that had been prepared. To complete the arrangement. The apartment above was a template, and my apartment below was the copy, and both were still incomplete because the living person was still in the wrong one. I stood up from the bed and I left the room and I went downstairs and I locked my door and I sat on the couch and I stayed there until morning. I want to tell you that I resisted. I want to tell you that I called someone Dev, my mother, a priest, a psychiatrist, and that they helped me see what was happening and that I got out. But what happened is more complicated and less satisfying than that. What happened is that the distinction between resisting and not resisting became increasingly difficult to identify. I kept going upstairs. I told myself I was investigating. I told myself I was gathering information. I told myself I was being brave, or thorough, or rational. But each time I went up, I stayed longer. An hour, 2 hours, an afternoon. I'd sit on the couch and read the faceless paperback. I'd stand at the kitchen window and look out at the alley. I'd open the closet and look at my sweater hanging next to the old clothes and feel a strange, sad comfort, like visiting a childhood home that someone else lives in now. I stopped rearranging my apartment downstairs. There was no point. The furniture moved itself into the correct positions, and I let it, and my apartment settled into its final configuration, a perfect mirror of the one above, rendered in IKEA and thrift store finds instead of hand-built wood and iron. I stopped going to work, and I don't mean I stopped logging in. I mean I stopped going. I stopped opening my laptop. I stopped checking email. At some point an email came through that I saw on my phone that said something about a performance review, and I deleted it without reading it. Dev came by once in late March. He knocked on my door and I opened it. And he looked at me, and his face did something I hadn't expected. It tightened, the way a face tightens when you see something that worries you, but you don't want to say so. Jesus, Marcus, you look rough. I've been sick, I said. For how long? A while. He looked past me into the apartment. I saw him register the arrangement, the furniture in its final positions, the lights off, the blindness of the curtains I'd put up to match the heavy curtains upstairs. Can I come in? It's not a good time. He looked at me for a long moment. Are you okay? Yeah, I just need to rest. You're not answering your phone. I know. I'm sorry, I've just been sick. Yeah. He didn't believe me. I could see that. But he also didn't push. Call me when you're feeling better, okay? We'll get food. Okay. He left. I closed the door and locked it and went upstairs. By April, I was spending most of my time in the third-floor unit. I'd moved more things up there. Not furniture, the furniture was already there, in its permanent correct positions. But personal items, clothes, which I found hanging in the closet each time I returned, as if they'd been laundered and put away. Books, which appeared on the built-in shelves. My toothbrush, which I left on the bathroom sink, and which was always in the same spot when I came back, but dry, as if it hadn't been used. I ate up there sometimes. The stove didn't work. The gas was off, but I'd bring food from my kitchen and eat it at the counter, and the plates and forks I left behind were always washed and put away by the next visit. I started sleeping up there, not in the bed. On the couch at first, the way I'd been sleeping in my own apartment. But the couch was old and hard, and my back hurt. And one night I woke up at 3 a.m. with a stiff neck and looked at the bedroom door, which was open, and I could see from the couch that the bed was turned down again, left side pulled back, pillow waiting, and the glass of water was on the nightstand, and the room was warm and dark and quiet. I got up and went to the bedroom and got into the bed. The sheets were warm. The mattress yielded under me in a way my own mattress didn't. Old springs, broken in by decades of use, conforming to a body's weight with the ease of long practice. I lay on my left side and looked at the right side of the bed. The impression was there, the body-shaped curve in the mattress. And lying there, I could feel it, not a presence, not a body, not a ghost. A weight, a gravitational pull, like the way you can feel the mass of a large piece of furniture in a room even with your eyes closed. Something was occupying that space, something heavy and old and patient. I closed my eyes. I heard very softly the sound of breathing, not my breathing. A second rhythm, slower, deeper, coming from beside me or from inside the bed or from the building itself. I slept. I slept better than I had in months. Deep, dreamless, total sleep. When I woke up, it was morning, and the light through the heavy curtains was thin and gray, and the glass of water on the nightstand was empty, and I was lying on my left side, and the impression on the right side was deeper than it had been the night before. Here's what I need to tell you about the next 3 months, and I'm going to tell it plainly because the details have started to blur, and the plainness is the only honest thing I have left. I stopped going downstairs, not abruptly, gradually. First, I'd skip a day, then 2, then a week. My apartment on the second floor became the place I went to get food and use the bathroom. The plumbing upstairs didn't work. The water had been shut off at some point. And eventually I started keeping food upstairs in a cooler and using the bathroom less and less. I lost more weight. I stopped keeping track. I stopped looking in the mirror, the oval mirror above the couch, because the face I saw there was mine but not quite mine. Thinner, older, more settled, like a photograph of me taken 10 years from now, or 10 years ago, or in a life I hadn't lived. The sounds never came back. The furniture in my apartment downstairs stopped moving. Everything was in its final position. The arrangement was complete. I slept in the bed every night. The impression beside me deepened. The breathing beside me became familiar. The warmth of the apartment became my warmth. I stopped distinguishing between the heat of the building and the heat of my own body. I stopped thinking about Ellen. I stopped thinking about Dev. I stopped thinking about work, my parents, the outside world. Not because I'd forgotten them, but because they felt increasingly like details from a story I'd read a long time ago about someone I used to know. I was becoming part of the apartment. I knew this. I knew it the way you know you're falling asleep. You can feel it happening, and you could stop it if you wanted to, but you don't want to, because the falling itself is the relief you've been waiting for. One morning in June, I went downstairs to my apartment for the first time in weeks. I needed to get something, I can't remember what. Food, probably. Or maybe I just needed to see it. The apartment was cold. The radiator was off. It was summer now. The heat wasn't running. The air was stale. Dust had settled on every surface. My laptop was on the desk, dead. My phone was on the counter, also dead. The food in the refrigerator had gone bad. I could smell it before I opened the door. I stood in the living room and looked at the furniture, arranged in its final configuration, matching the apartment above in every detail. The rug was in position. The coffee table was centered. The bookshelf was against the east wall. Everything was where it was supposed to be. But it felt like a museum, a recreation of a room, set up to show visitors how someone once lived here. Everything in its place but nothing in use. No warmth, no weight, no impression. I looked up at the ceiling and I thought, I live up there now. And the thought didn't frighten me. It was just true. I took some canned food from the pantry and went back upstairs. The door was open, as it always was now. The hallway was warm. The living room was arranged. The book was open on the coffee table. The coat was on the couch. The shoes were by the door, and next to them, a pair of my shoes, which I must have left there weeks ago and forgotten about. I went to the bedroom. The bed was made. The left side was turned down. The glass of water was full. I sat on the bed and ate cold beans from the can and looked at the wall and felt the weight beside me, the slow, patient gravity of the impression. And I thought about Eugeniusz Wojcik, who built this building with his own hands and lived in this apartment for 50 years and died in this bed. And I wondered if what I was feeling was him, or the memory of him, or the shape he'd left in the world, or something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with a specific person and everything to do with a specific place. A hunger that buildings develop when they're old enough and empty enough. A need for weight, for warmth, for the slow, steady pressure of a living body against a mattress, wearing it down, deepening the impression, filling the space. Maybe he'd felt it too. Maybe the building had called to him the way it called to me, with sounds, with movements, with the patient rearrangement of the world until it matched the template. Maybe he'd resisted. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe it didn't matter in the end whether you resisted or not, because the building was patient, and the building was old, and the building had nothing but time. I'm writing this from the third-floor apartment. I'm sitting on the couch, the old couch, the one that was here before me, with a notebook I found in one of the kitchen drawers. The notebook has pages torn from it, and I know without checking that the scrap of paper in the ceramic bowl, the one that said "stay," came from this notebook. I didn't write it. Someone wrote it before me. Eugenius, or someone before Eugenius, or someone after Eugenius and before me. It doesn't matter. The message is the same, and the message is the building's, not any one person's. I should leave. I know I should leave, but I also know with the same certainty that I know the rug is in position, and the bookshelf is against the east wall, and the bed is turned down on the left side, that if I leave, the building will start again. The sounds will come back. The furniture will move. The apartment above will begin its slow, patient work of rearranging the world until someone new comes along who is tired enough, or alone enough, or hollowed out enough to answer. And I know that if I stay, if I keep sleeping in the bed, if I keep deepening the impression, if I let my weight and warmth fill the space that's been prepared for me, then the building will be satisfied. The sounds will stay quiet. The furniture will stay still. The next tenant of 4B will have a peaceful, ordinary apartment with no disturbances, and they'll never know what's above them, and they'll never need to. I can do that for them. I can be the weight that keeps the building quiet. I can be the thing in the impression. That's what I'm telling myself. That I'm choosing this, that I'm staying because I want to stay, because the warmth is real, because the silence is real, because the slow, heavy breathing beside me in the dark is as close to company as I've had in months, and closer to comfort than anything I had before. But sometimes in the early morning, when the light through the curtains is so thin it barely exists, when I can feel the impression beside me, and the warmth of the sheets, and the weight of the apartment pressing down on me like a hand on a chest, sometimes I wonder whether the choice was ever mine, whether I came to this apartment or it came to me, whether I opened the door or the door opened me, whether the key on the counter was an invitation or a lock. I wonder if Eugenius wondered the same thing at the end. I wonder if the person before him did too. The notebook has many missing pages. Someone tore them out over the years, one by one, and wrote single words on them and left them in the ceramic bowl for the next person to find. Stay, stay, stay. Always the same word, always the same handwriting, or what looks like the same handwriting, which is impossible unless the building writes it, unless the building has a hand, unless the hand is mine now, and it always was. I haven't torn a page out yet, but I will. I know I will, because the bowl is empty, and the next tenant will need to find the word there when they come. And I am the one who will write it, because I am the keeper now. I am the weight in the bed, the warmth in the walls, the sound of footsteps crossing a room that no one else can see. And downstairs, in the apartment that used to be mine, the furniture sits in its final arrangement, waiting for the next person who is tired enough to listen. I should tell you my name. I feel like I should tell you my name, so that someone knows it, so that someone remembers that I was a person before I was a place. My name is Marcus. I'm 29. I was 29. I work at a logistics company downtown, or I did, and I had a friend named Dev and a girlfriend named Ellen and parents in Champaign who think I'm busy. I want to call them. I want to pick up the phone and hear my mother's voice and tell her I'm not fine. I haven't been fine. I'm living in an apartment that belongs to a dead man, and I can't leave because leaving would mean admitting that what I feel next to me in the bed isn't real. And if it isn't real, then I am alone. And being alone was the thing I was running from when I moved here. But the phone is downstairs, and downstairs is far, and the bed is warm, and the left side is turned down, and the glass of water is full, and the building is quiet. So quiet. The quietest place I've ever been. I'll go downstairs tomorrow. I'll call someone tomorrow. I'll leave tomorrow. The building knows I won't. And the worst part, the part that keeps me here more than the warmth, more than the weight, more than the slow breathing in the dark, the worst part is that I know it too, and I don't mind. I don't mind at all. I don't mind at all.